with another prop build. In this episode, I'll show you the techniques that I use to customize my E11 blaster. This prop will make a fine addition to your Star Wars weapons collection. It can be used in your Star Wars fan films, and also while trooping with your Imperial buddies. Feel free to change any of the methods, tools, and parts used in this video. Tap into your imagination and get creative. All of the parts that were used in this video can be found in the description below.
For the weapon itself, I used the Star Wars Rebels Stormtrooper blaster made by Rubies. At the time of this video, Amazon had it for about $15. Other parts that I picked up were power cylinders from shapeways.com and a D-ring from shapeways.com. I also picked up a power shaver cord and a 3-pin inline microphone jack from eBay. The other greeblies were various computer repair screws that I found at work, and also a few 5/32 inch by 1/4 inch pop rivets. A rivet tool is not needed. I only use the outer shell of the rivets. To get started, remove the sticker and sand off any lettering on the blaster. I use 200 grit sandpaper to grind it down. Next, grab a drill with various bit sizes. A rotary tool with a cutting wheel and sanding drums may also be helpful. For the barrel holes, carefully drill small pilot holes in the center of each circle. Slowly increase the bit size and work your way up to make the holes larger. You will find that the Dremel small size sanding drum fits perfectly in the barrel holes. For all other holes, I still drilled out a small pilot hole with about a 1/16 inch bit. The 3 screw holes in the gun sight were first cut down with a Dremel cutting wheel and then drilled with a 1/8 bit, the diameter of the small screws that I used. Your bit size may vary with the screws that you use. For all other holes, I used a 5/32 inch bit. These holes were filled with 5/32 inch by 1/4 inch pop rivets. I also shaved out the scope rail using the Dremel with a drill bit and cut off the fake D-ring on the back with a small coping saw. Next, use Bondo or other filler to fill in any screw holes, dents, and seams. After the filler is dried, sand with 400 grit wet dry sandpaper to get the dried putty smoothed out. You'll also want to gently sand the entire blaster with the 400 grit sandpaper to remove the sheen from the plastic. After sanding, remove any debris from the blaster with a damp lint-free cloth. In a well-ventilated area, spray the blaster with your choice of primer spray paint. I'm a fan of Krylon paints. Spray in a back and forth motion using the recommended distance. Keep that can moving to prevent puddles, runs, and drips. Prior to laying the color coat, lightly sand with fine grit sandpaper, around 800 to 1000 grit. For the color coat, we'll use Krylon black and a satin finish. Prior to spraying, I heated up the spray paint by soaking the can in a bowl of warm tap water. Try to submerge the can by about 3 inches. This will give the paint better flow and also help prevent clumping and orange peel. Just like our primer coat, keep that can moving back and forth to avoid pools. I sprayed 2 coats, waiting 24 hours in between coats. We can finally start adding some detail now. Mask off the bolt with some tape. I use an airbrush to apply all-clad polished aluminum. If you don't have an airbrush, spray some scrap plastic in satin black and test some Rub and Buff silver leaf or some Testors silver enamel to see which method works for you. To give the blaster a worn effect, I dry brushed Testors silver and brass enamels. Starting with silver, I dipped a stiff bristled brush in the paint and wiped off almost all of the paint on a paper towel. I then dry brushed various edges of the blaster. The flecks left on the brush will stick to the raised areas. I applied the same technique to the scope using the brass paint. Using epoxy, secure all of your screws and pop rivets. I do not recommend using a rivet tool to secure the rivets. It could crack the plastic, especially at the seams. Next, I made a small wire connector for the power cylinders using pop rivets. I hammered out the pin using a small hammer. I reinserted the pin halfway to try to retain the shape of the rivet, and used snips to shorten the length. I then used pliers to round it out. This part isn't required, you can simply drill a hole in the back of the power cylinders and insert the wire. Using epoxy, I fastened the pop rivets to the rear of the power cylinders. Mix some more epoxy and secure the power cylinders and the D-ring. Take out the mic jack and unscrew it from the assembly. Cut the jack in half with a small coping saw. You can now secure it to the Hengstler counter with epoxy. Once dry, the wires will fit perfectly in the holes. To make the line on the bolt, I used some electrical tape and on top of that, some foil tape. I did this to give it some depth. I cut a small sliver off and placed it over the bolt. I then carefully cut the two curved edges with an X-Acto blade. For the gun sight, I found some scrap plastic that was 1 millimeter thick. I traced around a quarter and cut the circle out. I then drilled in the middle to open it up. I found some terrific E11 reticle templates on whitearmor.net. The link is in the description below. I sized the reticle down to about 24 millimeters and cut it out. To laminate it, I used some packing tape to cover the front and back. I cut it out and hot glued it to the cover piece. I then hot glued the completed parts to the scope. I measured the opening on the Hengstler counter to be 32 millimeters by 7 millimeters. Using Photoshop, I set the canvas size, a black background, typed my 501st Legion ID in white, printed it out, and trimmed it. If you don't have Photoshop, you can download GIMP for free to complete this task. For the cover, I found some 1 millimeter clear plastic and cut the same dimensions with a utility knife. I secured the numbers down with Testors Clear Parts glue and also glued the plastic covering piece in place.
Now we're ready to go out on patrol. Rebel scum.